Good evening, everyone. Whoa, that's loud. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Chaska and welcome to our Chaska Community Center. We're really excited to have you all here. My name is Mark Winshuttle. I'm the mayor of Chaska, and I get the distinct honor to do a short welcome here to you for you tonight. So I do want to start off with just saying some thank yous. The Chaska Scott Knight, Chief Knight, and the Chaska Police Department, and the Chaska Park and Rec, and the Chaska Human Rights are the sponsors for this evening's event. So we want to say thank you to those organizations for bringing this forward. I had the, I don't know if you call it a pleasure, or I had the opportunity to visit the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And that's such a different than when you walk through the halls and look at these pictures. It's kind of chilling to see the difference. And if you ever have the opportunity to get out to Washington, D.C. to the Holocaust Museum, please do so. And lastly, in closing, I do believe in one thing, that if you don't talk about your history, you relive it. And so I feel very fortunate that we have the opportunity to have this experience right here in Chaska, and we sure as heck never, never want to relive this again. So thank you. Enjoy.
Good evening. My name is Scott Knight, and I have the privilege of being the Chaska Police Chief. I would like to say to all of you who are visiting us here this evening, welcome. Thank you, and welcome to Chaska. For those of you who are from Chaska, good to see you. I'm not surprised that you're here. We are all here to do a few things tonight. We are here to learn. We are here to remember. And we are here to honor as a community and as a people like Judith and people whose pictures are out in the hallway as you came in. And I hope when you leave tonight, you'll take time to visit the exhibit. It's my honor tonight to introduce Mr. Steve Hunnigs. Steve is the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. Steve got his BA from the University of Madison in Wisconsin, and he got his law degree here in Minnesota. He practiced law for 16 years, starting first as an Assistant Deputy Attorney General for the state of Minnesota, and then he went on in private practice. In the year 2006, Steve became the Executive Director of the JCRC. Since that time, working with his colleagues, Steve and the JCRC have received a number of awards. Those awards are numerous. They are from the National Guard of Minnesota, the Temple Israel, the International Leadership Institute, Normandale Community College, and many others. And tonight, they are here to celebrate the partnership that starts with the city of Chaska as an acquaintance and graduates into a very strong, strong partnership, which brings us all here this evening. To that, to Steve, to the JCRC, we are very, very appreciative, and we thank them, and we thank you. Please welcome Steve.
Good evening, everyone. Look around you. Look at this wonderfully packed theater here in Chaska, and say thank you for everyone who honors humanity by your presence tonight on a somewhat snowy and cold night. So it's wonderful to see everybody. A lot of thank yous. Bear with me, they're important. First, for Mayor of Chaska, Mark Winshuttle, thank you, Mr. Mayor, who, by the way, was the fire chief of my town, St. Louis Park, for many years. Police Chief Scott Knight and the entire Chaska Police Department. Let's give applause to the chief and the mayor. Noting the chief has been with the Chaska Police Department more than 40 years. Of course, to Judy Meisel, we love you so much. We're so pleased that you're here and receiving this award tonight. Judith. Ben Cohen, the grandson who has traveled from a far distance to be with us, whom I will introduce. Michael and Sonny Cohen. Michael, Sonny, and two sisters of Judy, Michael's sisters, who have come from a great distance, bi-coastal as a matter of fact. Minna Cohen and her husband Jeffrey from Mendocino, California, and Debbie Tucker from Potomac, Maryland. Let's have applause for the entire family. I thank our JCRC staff led by Laura Zell and Anthony Sussman and Susie Greenberg, who worked so hard to organize tonight's events. A lot of details, as you will soon see. David Sherman, stand up. David, where are you? Stand up for a second. David is the photographer of those spectacularly beautiful pictures that you see. In a way, his artistry gives us immortality because, sadly, many of the survivors pictured have passed away, and David, while they were living, captured their essence. So thank you for that. And David is with his parents, Jim and Esty Sherman. Great to see Jim and Esty, and his wife, Julie. Very good, but we have the whole family together. I want to thank some more folks that, without their remarkable work, would not have been possible tonight. Mary Monteith from Chaska Parks and Recreation, the Chaska Human Rights Commission, Communications for the City of Chaska. You see all around you, Chaska Herald, who wrote a beautiful story, too, about tonight's event and the transfer of memory. Our dear friends at the FBI, who have been such great partners over the years. Special Agent in Charge Jill Sanborn, who couldn't be with us, but I know sends her greetings, and the fact that the FBI is such a great friend, reflection of her determination to strengthen our partnership. Jeff Van Ness, Joan Fraley, Kevin Smith, Kirk Beard, all with us tonight. You'll hear more of them later, so thank you to our great friends from the FBI for all that you do to keep us safe. It's a nice relationship. Last year we were fortunate, the JCRC, to receive the Director's Community Leadership Award from the FBI and an opportunity to go to DC and receive the award from the Director. And this year it goes to Judith, and Judith will have the same opportunity. So thank you very much. You see outside the Transfer of Memory exhibit. About 10 days ago was International Holocaust, the Day of Remembrance, January 27th. Transfer of memory, in a way, reflects Deborah Lipstadt, the eminent historian of the Holocaust, and her note that the tyranny of biology robs us of our survivors. So what is it that we do? We try as best we can to recapture the experience of a survivor by David's photographs, by the exhibit, by the programming that JCRC does in association with it, by the programming that the hosts, such as Chaska, do. It brings it to life. Transfer of Memory has been to 50 venues, thousands, tens of thousands of people have seen it in person, millions of media impressions, and we are so very proud of it. And in addition to David and Lily Chester, who wrote the vignettes, and the Chester family, who have so wonderfully supported, and other people have supported the project over the years. You'll get a chance to read the little stories, and there are countless stories there that inspire our future. People who survived the Holocaust, the Shoah, who came to Minnesota for better lives for their families, to make a better life for all people. Two quick little pieces, because it relates to Judith, one, Charles Fedor, who passed away last year, he survived the Holocaust in Budapest, but he spent practically his entire career working for the American Red Cross. And Judith, part of her story, of course, is what she did, how she was an activist in the civil rights movement, how she met Dr. King, how she met Dr. King's daughter, assisting in the turbulent times, assisting in the movement towards civil rights was the essence of Judy. Now it's my pleasure to introduce a third generation of the Cohen family that's with us today, Ben Cohen. Ben is from Brooklyn, or he's not from Brooklyn, but he's a Brooklyn, New York filmmaker, and he's making this wonderful documentary about his mother, Judith, and her, shall we say, engagement with the law, the judiciary, German law enforcement, American law enforcement, because even at this late day, years after the end of World War II, years after, thankfully, the end of the Holocaust, Judith was able to provide critical evidence in a trial of a guard for the Stutthof Concentration Camp. So there she is, all these years later, participating in pursuing justice and bringing those responsible to justice. And Ben, as you'll hear, has had the opportunity to attend the trial, has had the opportunity, of course, to know his wonderful and beloved grandmother. He's preserving the trial, he's preserving the activities surrounding the trial, the testimony and the records, so that someday we'll be able to see this sort of in the larger picture. And one thought that's remarkable to me is that, of course, during the war, during the Second World War, and before and afterwards, it was the FBI who was protecting the American people. A story that comes to mind is when the FBI was able to apprehend the German saboteurs that landed in Florida and Long Island in 1942, not long after they were disembarked by submarine. So there they were, protecting our country. But here, decades later, there they were working with the German equivalent of the FBI to bring this gentleman to justice. Isn't that a remarkable transformation after all of these years, and gives us hope for the future? Conclude with this note, because in many ways, Judith is a vicar, a hand of justice. And it makes me think of the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem in 1962, and the prosecutor, a fellow named Gideon Hausner. And Shimon Peres wrote a foreword for the second edition of Gideon Hausner's book about the Eichmann trial. And he wrote about Hausner, for he was not only speaking on behalf of the victims, but he was also speaking on behalf of every single Jew and every single man and woman who are moral and human. So when you look at Judith, and we hear from Ben about the documentary he's making, keep in mind those words, because there she stands, and there we all stand, as the person, as the people, trying to bring about justice after all of these years. Thank you very much, and now it's my great pleasure to introduce Ben Cohen.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you to Scott Knight, the City of Chaska, and the JCRC for inviting me to speak here. It's truly an honor to share this story with you. 3 months ago, on November 6th, I walked into a juvenile courtroom in Munster, Germany. It was the opening day of the trial of Dr. Johann Rebogen. More than 75 years ago, Rebogen was an SS guard at Stutthof Concentration Camp. At 95 years old, he faced charges for accessory to murder. My great-grandmother, Mina Becker, was murdered in the gas chamber at Stutthof. When I first saw Rebogen, my hands shook. My heart stopped. The courtroom was absolutely silent, except for the rapid-fire clicks from cameras. This trial had captured the attention of news agencies around the world. it might be the last Nazi trial. From a very young age, I was told a story by my grandmother, Judy Meisel. I call her Savta, which is the Hebrew word for grandmother. Savta's story is the reason I found myself face to face with this Nazi guard. Savta was born in Lithuania on February 7th, 1929, in a small town known as Jasvina. This weekend, we're celebrating her 90th birthday. Savta's father, my great-grandfather, Osserbecker, worked in the lumber trade. Her mother, Mina, was, as my Savta describes her, a liberated woman in her time. She believed young girls could be educated as much as the boys. Savta looked up to her two older siblings, Rachel and Abe. In 1938, when Savta was 8 years old, her father passed away. Mina and the children moved to the city of Kovno, which is today called Kaunas, and Mina took up work as a seamstress to support the family. The next year, in the summer of 1940, Soviet Russia occupied Lithuania. Life changed under Soviet rule. They could no longer attend synagogue, light candles, or observe Shabbat in public. Mina warned the children to carefully conceal their Jewish identities in public. At that time, anti-Semitism was at a fever pitch throughout Europe. Nazi Germany was invading neighboring countries. Savta recalls hearing rumors that they were burning the Jews in Poland. As a young child, 11 years old, she was told not to ask too many questions. How could anyone even explain this to a child? The next summer, in 1941, Hitler invaded Lithuania. Over the next 4 years of my Savta's life, she endured one harrowing episode after another. For 3 years, she and her family were forced to live in the Kovno ghetto. About 29,000 Jews were confined to this ghetto. Within the first 3 months, 12,000 Jews were murdered. Many others died from starvation. They were forced into slave labor, working in a factory making rubber boots for the German army. Because of Savta's blonde hair and blue eyes, she was selected and trained to sneak out of the ghetto to find bread and supplies. She was at constant risk of being caught. Punishment would have been certain death. She was only 12 years old. By June of 1944, Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, ordered the ghettos to be liquidated, and the Nazis began deporting Jews from Kovno to other camps throughout Nazi-occupied territories in Germany. Savta, Rachel, and Mina were helpless as Abe was sent to Stutthof Concentration Camp, and the women were deported to Stutthof. Now, I have to pause for a moment and point out, there is no substitute for hearing this story firsthand. Nothing is as powerful as an eyewitness testimony. My Savta has shared her story countless times. Many of you have heard it, and many of you have seen the documentary Talk for All, which was made over 25 years ago about her life. If I were to guess, and I'm not trying to exaggerate, in her lifetime, she may have told her story to hundreds of thousands of people. One classroom, one auditorium, one interview, and one willing listener at a time. In April of 2017, she found an unlikely audience. The FBI contacted my family and informed us that investigators from Germany were seeking information about Stutthof. We were shocked at the news. German prosecutors were seeking Safta's eyewitness testimony about her time in the camp. They wanted to learn as much as possible about her interaction with guards and any detail she could still remember about the conditions in the camp. They were pursuing an indictment of a guard, several guards in fact, still alive and free in Germany. I flew to Minneapolis to be there when the investigators came to Safta's apartment to interview her. Safta can still remember a lot, but to everyone's surprise, she even recognized a photo of Rebogen in his Nazi uniform. After 4 difficult hours of questions, the investigators had the information they came for. They packed up their things and left. A few months later, we received a copy of the indictment, which included Safta's testimony. Then we waited an entire year for the trial. When Safta, Rachel, and Mina arrived at Stutthof, the first thing Safta noticed were piles and piles of shoes. A female guard whipped the arriving prisoners and shouted, "You'll never get out of here alive. You're all to be doomed." In the eyes of these guards, we were not human. They ripped out my great-grandmother Mina's gold teeth. One guard stood on Safta's left and another on the right. They tore her hair from her head. A woman holding an infant was powerless as her baby was taken and killed right before her eyes. Bleeding and terrorized, the women were given uniforms, a pair of wooden clogs, and assigned to barracks. Every day when they were made to stand for hours, they were forced into slave labor again. Meals, if you can call it that, consisted of potato peels and sawdust in a soup. Bread was scarcely given, and there was never enough. As described in great detail in the indictment of the guard, the SS had carefully designed a program of starvation. The slave labor, combined with malnutrition, was the perfect method to kill the prisoners while getting a little bit of work out of them for the German war effort. The indictment described other killing methods. A room in the camp was set up to look like a doctor's office. Prisoners would line up, told they would get a physical exam. An SS guard disguised as a doctor would invite the prisoner into the room, and they would be asked their height and weight. The prisoner would answer, and the guard would direct them to a scale to perform measurements. It appeared like an ordinary scale, but it was anything but. As the doctor raised the measurement tool, a mechanism would trigger a wall behind them to open, and they would be shot. The next prisoner would come into a clean room, thinking that the prisoner had just left. Prisoners were forced to stand outside, to freeze to death in the winter. The guards were under direct order to shoot anyone who was believed to try to escape. And then there was the gas chamber, a small red brick building at the rear of the camp. On November 21st, 1944, my great-grandmother, Mina, was selected for the gas chamber. She didn't know what she had been selected for. It may have been a day of labor at the factory. Safta did not want to be separated from her mother and soon found herself with Mina in line at the gas chamber. They were directed to undress. Safta and Mina entered the gas chamber when a guard looked at Safta and said she was too young to be there. He ordered her back to her barrack. Clinging to Mina, Safta refused, so the guard began to count to 10. "Lafe, Judith, lafe," Mina yelled. "Run, Judy, run." So Safta ran. Some prisoners had been assigned to handle the dead bodies of the gas chamber and gave Softa an extra uniform. She returned to her barrack. We know this date, November 21st, 1944, because the Nazis kept detailed records. Here's the page from the record book at the Stutthof Museum today, which shows my great-grandmother Mina Becker was gassed on November 21st, 1944. 2 months later, in the dead of winter, Softa and Rachel escaped Stutthof during a death march. They spent the next 5 months on the run. They crossed a frozen river to first take refuge in a convent. But when the nuns wanted them to convert to Catholicism, determined to survive as Jews, they decided to leave. They found shelter with a family, running a stopover station for Nazi soldiers. It was no picnic. They were again beaten and tortured as slaves, but compared to where they had been for the past 4 years, this was an improvement. As the Allies overtook the area, the family fled, bringing Softa and Rachel with them on a boat headed to Denmark. The boat was torpedoed, but again, Softa and Rachel managed to survive. They lived in a displaced persons camp for several weeks in Denmark until they were finally liberated on May 6, 1945. The girls were rehabilitated in Denmark as refugees. They learned that Abe had survived Dachau. They reunited with their brother in Canada, and Softa eventually settled down in Philadelphia, where she married my grandfather Gabe and started a family of her own. Her first child she named Minna, then my father Michael, and my aunt Debbie. Softa found freedom in America, but when she saw the prevalence of racism within her own community, she could not sit idly by. She was not a little girl anymore. She began taking action in the civil rights movement. She shared this story as a warning against intolerance and hate. When her grandchildren were born, we reached the age that she was during the war, she made sure that we too understood what happened and taught us that every person has a responsibility and ability to make a difference. She often started these teachings by asking, "Who do you think was responsible for what happened?" Students often answered, "Hitler." And she would respond with, "The whole world was responsible." Although Softa's story has been part of my family's DNA for generations, we never discussed or considered that a guard from Stutthof could be made to answer for his role in what happened after all this time. As a witness or co-plaintiff, Softa had the option to go to the trial of Johann Rebogen and give her testimony in person. Had this trial happened 10 years ago, Softa would have gone there. She would have stood in court, looked Rebogen in the eye, and given her testimony in person. But by the time this trial opened in 2018, at the advisement of her doctors, her attorney, and our family, Softa agreed it was not possible to make the trip. For health reasons, it was just too difficult, too risky. But someone from our family should be there, so I decided to go. I'm a filmmaker, and I wanted to document everything. I wanted to be able to share what was going on in the courtroom with Softa and anyone willing to listen. So I brought a camera and a film crew. I felt it was an important chapter of her story and my family's story that needed to be witnessed and examined. We have so many questions. How did he end up there? What does he think about what happened? Does he have any feeling of remorse or guilt? The first day of the trial began with a public prosecutor from Dortmund presenting the charges, accessory to murder. The first trials of this kind started just 10 years ago. Before that, only guards who could be proven to have pulled a trigger were charged with murder in German courts. Prosecutors point out that the first and most important reason they pursue these trials so many years later is for the survivors and the victims. The survivors have had to live with this trauma their entire lives. We owe it to them to pursue this justice as long as we can. The discomfort of this old man on trial is nothing compared to the discomfort that these survivors have endured. There are many theories about why Germany waited so long to pursue these cases. There would have been thousands of guards on trial for accessory to murder if the judicial system had done its job decades ago. Through all this mess, one thing is clear. It was a disservice to both the victims and the perpetrators to have waited so long. This is the sad truth of justice delayed. After the charges were read, I watched in astonishment as my SOFTA's attorney, Professor Cornelius Nessler, stood. He faced Rebogen, and squarely, with the full weight of my family's suffering on his shoulders, he read the following. Statement by Judy Meisel, Minneapolis, co-plaintiff in criminal proceedings against Johann Rebogen in front of the court of Münster. When I was 12 years old, my family was imprisoned by the Germans in the ghetto of Kovno. There I learned to live in completely overcrowded rooms, to work hard as a child, and to starve. I saw daily humiliation and arbitrary terror, and yet I was not prepared for what came afterwards. Then came Stutthof, and I experienced the unimaginable. Hell, established and executed by the SS. Everyone had only one garment, no sanitary facilities, almost no food. Death became a daily companion in my life. The prisoners died slowly, tormented by malnutrition and disease. Every morning, a heap of bodies piled in front of the barracks. Or, if they had not been selected on their arrival, like children, the elderly, and the ones who were not strong enough to work, the weakest, day after day, were destined for slow and terrible death in the gas chamber. The last time I saw my mother, we were already without clothes along with a group of other women in front of the gas chamber. When there was an opportunity for me to return to the barracks, urged by my mother, I left her behind. Stutthof. That was the organized mass murder by the SS, made possible with the help of the guards. The defendant, along with the other guards, made sure no one could escape from hell. He made sure my mother could be murdered, and he almost succeeded in helping murder me. The fact that the defendant is confronted at the end of his life with his participation in this crime, which is beyond human understanding, is simply a question of justice. This righteousness comes late, far too late, and I do not understand why the German judiciary needed more than 7 decades to bring these men to trial who were involved in the mass murder at Stutthof. This criminal trial means justice to me, and it means late justice for my murdered mother. It may be that the defendant did not choose to become a guard at Stutthof, but he must face the responsibility for what he did when he was in Stutthof. He was responsible for helping with these unimaginable crimes against humanity, for helping to murder my beloved mother, whom I have missed so much my entire life. The courtroom was quiet. Several people around me were weeping. I looked to my right and watched as Rebogan listened to Softa's statement. As one of the prosecuting lawyers began reading another statement, he hung his head. The court session was adjourned for the day. Hearing Softa's statement read in German to the courtroom and to see that Nazi have to listen to it, I thought, no matter how flawed and no matter how late, this was the pursuit of justice. I exited the courtroom and immediately I was hounded by press. It turns out I was the only family member of any survivor to be there. I had no idea. Polish radio, Russia 1 television, Associated Press, the BBC, Germany's national public television stations, and the New York Times. I gave every interview I could. I felt like it was my duty. Maybe this was the real reason I was there. They all wanted to know Softa's story. They wanted to know what she thought about the trial. What did I think about the trial? What does our family want to happen to Rebogan? The next day, a TV crew came and spent an evening following me around Münster, Germany. The reporter interviewed me at length about Softa and the trial. The piece aired as part of a 1-hour special dedicated to the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht, which happened to be that Friday. When reporters asked me, why did I come here? I told them about a promise that my Softa made in the barracks at Stutthof. Softa often tells about a pact that she and the other prisoners made. They promised one another that if anyone survived, they would tell the story of what happened there. She kept that promise, and now it is my responsibility to do the same. The magnitude is unimaginable. We remember the 6 million Jews, and we remember the millions of others killed by the Nazis and their collaborators. Non-Jewish Polish citizens, Soviet civilians and prisoners of war, Serbian civilians, persons with disabilities, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, and anyone deemed an enemy to the Nazi Party. Studies show that today, younger generations have already started to forget at alarming rates. A recent study revealed that 2/3 of American millennials don't know what Auschwitz is. And throughout the world, Holocaust denial is on the rise. After hours of interviews, I was exhausted. I returned to my hotel and I called my parents, and then I called Softa. They're doing the best they can for you, I told her. The trial continued for another 2 weeks. I received daily updates from the lawyers and analysis from Per Heinrichs, one of Germany's most accomplished reporters covering these trials. In the second week of the trial, Rebogan gave his own statement. He denied any first-hand knowledge of any killing in the camp. Though he did acknowledge that the conditions for the prisoners were terrible, he tried to paint himself as a victim, saying he was forced to be there by a draft. According to him, Stutthof was his own personal hell. I found his statement to be a sad denial of the truth. Either he lacked the courage to tell us what really happened, or he had actually convinced himself of his own lies. During the third week, the prosecution called an expert historian to testify. The historian began explaining that, in fact, there was no draft. Every SS member at Stutthof was a volunteer. It was a direct refute of the most critical details of Rebogan's statement. At that moment, Rebogan crumpled in his chair and appeared to fall asleep. Judge Burkane stopped and asked Rebogan if he was okay. Rebogan said no, and they ended the session to reevaluate his health. Rebogan never returned to court. A medical exam was scheduled, and today he's in a nursing home. The trial is over. There will be no official verdict for Johann Rebogen. When the trial ended, my parents took Softa to dinner at one of her favorite restaurants. They asked her for the first time, "How do you feel that the trial has ended?" She thought to herself for a moment and then told them. She was disappointed, but she also felt like she had achieved something that she never really thought was imaginable. To Softa, it was monumental to know that in the courtroom, in the papers and television, Germany and the whole world had listened to her story. And she thought about her mother, what it would be like to tell her that her great-grandson was there to bear witness. Thank you. I would like to invite my father, Michael Cohen, and my Softa, Judy Meisel, the most courageous and special person I know, to join us on stage.
Good evening, everyone. It's my distinct pleasure to be with you to present the 2018 FBI Directors Community Leadership Award to Judy Meisel. This award honors select individuals around the country who have demonstrated outstanding contributions to their communities through service and special efforts in combating crime and violence. Judy has done that and much more. As a Holocaust survivor, educator, and civil rights activist, Judy has been part of an ongoing criminal investigation in Germany in pursuit of Nazi war criminals that we just heard about. She has been an active voice against hate crimes and civil rights injustices by telling her story of hope and survival. In our region, Judy has been a leader in telling her story, and by doing so, she has further illuminated our collective efforts to rid society of hate crimes, to help advance civil rights, and to offer hope for all. As perhaps one of the last eyewitnesses to the horrors of Nazi concentration camps, Judy has a perspective that we wished she didn't have. Judy's path to Minnesota started in Eastern Europe through the ghettos, concentration camp, eventual liberation to Denmark, and then to the U.S., where she would witness race riots in 1963. The filmmaker Laura Balalas, who produced a documentary on Judy's life called Talk for Alt, Survival of Human Spirit, may have said it best when she said that Judy discovered that only unflinching vigilance against racism could safeguard the liberty of all people. Judy has dedicated her life to helping others through her own experience. She has dedicated her life to upholding civil rights for all. She is a source of strength and inspiration for all of us. And I am honored to present the 2018 Directors Community Leadership Award to Judy Meisel, which I will present in a minute in a certificate. And here's what the certificate says. The U.S. Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, in recognition of outstanding service to the local community and of the enduring contributions to the advancement of justice, the Directors Community Leadership Award is presented to Judy Meisel. Signed, Christopher A. Ray, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Congratulations, Judy. Thank you.
this wireless microphone to work first. How about that? Any questions? Yes.
So, Judy, you have had the incredible position. You have been through all these different changes in U.S. history and world history. All of these different conflicts you have been present for firsthand. And I wanted to ask, with everything you've seen the rise of anti-Semitism to heights unknown in mankind. You have seen racism in a very gruesome and bloody battle here in the U.S. I wanted to ask, what do you see today and what worries you have today? Because things seem to be rising in almost similar ways.
I'm going to try to ask her a question for you just because she may not have heard everything. So the question is, after everything you've been through, what is happening today that has you most worried? And is there anything going on today that you're worried about?
I'd like to understand that.
Sure.
And that's why I stop. I have to tell you, the most important thing, what I have for now, is of course I'm 90 years old. This week was my birthday. And I don't have to say, they call me many of the places that I'm going to go. There's, you could mention some of it that I go very, very big. That's fine. But I can't, do anything. I love to be amongst the children. And I love it, and I'm very, very happy here. I'm at Knollwood, I'm very lucky that I'm in there. And to me, the most important thing is being Jewish. But to me, the most important is I'm not saying just the Jews that we are better than others. We are all the same, living every day, raising children, doing all kinds of things. We do this all for that. Thank God, the joy that I have this week with my children. I would like my children to stand up here. Come on. Can you come on? Wonderful children, and they came for me to celebrate. And this is the most important thing. That's what I live by. And with that life, I give it to other people. Thank you.
I had a lot of discussions with my grandmother about very difficult topics, and she's very quick to remind me to live every day of my life as best as I can, no matter how big or difficult the challenges the world seem. She always reminds me that it's important that I try to live a life that is good. So that might also answer your question as well.
I don't want to make a political statement on behalf of my mother, but I will say this, that right after what happened in Charlottesville, there were many people that wanted to get her reaction to what took place. And that was very difficult for her and for us to see, as it was for many Americans to see people walking through the streets of Charlottesville and yelling very anti-Semitic things. And her comment at that time was, how amazing it was that the German chancellor was so quick to condemn it, and the president of our country was not.
is hate for so many things. And this is, we all have to get together as human beings. That's what I mean. We are not better than one or the other. We're all made of flesh and blood. And we all have our place where we can go and celebrate holidays and everything else. And we should appreciate each other. This is the most important thing. Otherwise, the countries that we are, if we don't do that, we all get away with it. Anti-Semitism is nothing but hatred. And they don't do anything. And they don't prepare anything. And they don't teach their children. And this is what we have to do. And the same thing, all the isms that we did. I came here, and the first thing that was, I got off from the boat when I came to Canada, and I saw what happened when I came to the United States, and how African American was feeling here. I jumped in with that, because I could no longer live in a country that hates it. So I hope that we can all do this. The people that were here that mentioned everything, I can't hear, so I don't know what they said. But I want to thank you, all of you, for arranging this and for you taking the time off from your work and everything and do this. Those are the things that is going to happen. And please God, we should have it happen. And I want to thank all this Chaska and all that who allow me to have us here. Thank you for having me.
After you survived Stutthof, who were some of the most important in your people in your life after?
The most important thing in my life, when I came here, I was at that time, I was 15 years old, waiting 47 hours. I owe my life to the Danish people. How many of you are Danish? They really helped me, what they did to me. And all this, they put me in a hospital and they told me everything, and they did everything else. And I have to tell you, the first thing they wanted to know, what you want when they, like there must have been about 20 people who were coming, Danes who were coming from all over to interview us and everything. And I, at that time, 15 years old, and I couldn't speak the language, but I spoke a little bit of German, and they know, and we talked about it. And I have to tell you, the first thing I said, I want to go to a synagogue where I could go and see a Sefer Torah, the Torah. And right here sits an incredible man who does every Wednesday for me, who does for me. I can't wait until that Wednesday because we study Torah. And the Torah to me is like flesh, like something. I go back, I take out that another Torah book that my daughter sent me, and to see it's great if they are talking about that.
this point in your life?
It was not very easy to stand, to be there. We had about 5 people, and one FBI, and the other one was from Germany, and they were very nice. They are very nice and everything. But it's really, but the fact that I didn't notice the guy that killed over 6,000 Jewish women in Stutthof gave me, I was like this in my heart, couldn't get over what was happening. And I look out at you, and you're so wonderful to come out of this weather, to come near me and here for you, and you to take me out. And I'm so grateful, because people like you will make this world a better world to live in. We can't live just for nothing. We have to work for it, to see how we can do, teaching our children, our grandchildren, and do everything. Thank God I'm here 5.5 years, and I have now 8 great grandchildren.
So that might be a good note to move into a birthday celebration. If you would all be willing to stay where you are for a moment.
As Pat was alluding to, among other things, today is a celebration of life, and since we have about a minute here, Judith was referencing the Torah. Of course, in Hebrew, we also call the Torah Eitz Chaim, tree of life. So today is about celebration of life, and right now we're going to take a couple seconds to learn the Hebrew word, and the word is simcha, which means joy or celebration. So today, amidst the pursuit of justice, we're also here to celebrate life, and we should have you know that this is Judith's 90th birthday. And we're going to sing happy birthday to her because we have this beautiful cake right here.
One, two, three.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Judy. Happy birthday to you.
Is the most important for me. Know that you, because I was really trained in Philadelphia, in Santa Barbara, in ADL, and when I came here, I was kind of upset that I was not, and then I found you out, and so you are making now to take changes made. That is in my heart. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Judith, for those sweet words. And you should know, again, thank you to Chaska and everybody that came tonight and all responsible for this wonderful event, FBI and Directors Community Leadership Award. Let's have some time, fellowship afterwards. We have a reception back that way, I understand. And so we'll all have a chance to talk, and perhaps we'll have a chance to say hello and wish Yom Ha'atzmaach, happy birthday, Judith.
thank you very much to the entire